Welcome to another episode of On the Couch. My name is Maddie Stratton and I'm here with my co-host, colleague and friend, Winnie Adamson.
Hello and welcome, listeners. Today we are not on the couch. We are actually in a recording studio at the University of Wollongong and on Dharawal country, and we are joined in person with three fabulous guests.
That's right, Winnie. We are in this new way of recording On the Couch episode, and we are honoured to be joined by three local drag stars, Roxee Horror, Cherry Ripe and Lawrence of Australia. Before we get into introducing our guests, we would like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians on the land in which we meet, live and work. For us today, it's the Wadi Wadi people of the Dharawal Nation. We recognise their powerful connection to land, waterways, sea and to community. We would like to pay our deepest respects to elders past and present and emerging, to families, communities and survivors, and to those who never made it home. As we share in our own knowledge, teaching and learnings in this space today, may we also pay respect to the knowledge embedded forever within the Aboriginal custodianship of country.
Our listeners may also be familiar when we acknowledge diverse personal and professional experiences that we all have, which we can reflect and draw on during these discussions as we talk today. Please take good care during today's chat and do whatever you need to do to absorb the content and practice good self-care. As always, we would refer you to past episodes of On the Couch, one with psychologist Chris Cheers, and also one with Danielle May Kaplan and Egan McGee discussing concepts of belonging and community care. So go back and give those a listen when you get the chance.
If you are joining us on the couch for the first time, we would encourage you to think of it as a visual podcast or a vodcast. And what a stunning visual you have today. You can watch, listen or share this episode on YouTube, Podbean or wherever you get your podcasts. But please get comfy in your own space, wherever that is. And of course, you'll find any references we chat about today in the podcast show notes. I think we should probably get into introducing our guest, Winnie.
Yes, let's do it. It's our absolute pleasure to welcome Roxee Horror, Cherry Ripe and Lawrence of Australia on the couch.
Hey.
Hello.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you so much.
Such an all-star cast, right?
Stop
Right. So all of three of you have such unique and individual experiences in the local drag scene, and we're really keen to get into talking about this today. Also get to know you a little bit and chat about consent in performing, how drag culture intersects with trans allyship and sexual identities. But our listeners can read your whole bios in our show notes, but we wanted to just give a little introduction to you three. Cherry Ripe is where punk rock meets red carpet glamour. Cherry has gained lots of experience since her debut drag performance at the ripe age of 14 and has performed all over the east coast of Australia. Cherry has also produced her own events, assisted in producing larger community events. Lawrence of Australia is a real southern beau, south coast that is. He has worked prolifically for 6 years in the drag scene, has a passion for politics and history, and spends most nights curled up to a nice journal article. Women love him, fish fear him. He's Lawrence of Australia. And we have Roxee Horror. Roxee has been making waves in Wollongong since 2016. You have read about her in the papers and you have seen her drag Storytime. You have probably watched her slay in one of her many amazing stage productions.
So when we all met last year, we spoke about how we wanted this episode to run. So we spoke about this being a really safe space to explore, and that even though we're really privileged to have three diverse drag stars on the couch, that your experiences and I guess perspectives don't represent the whole drag community and everyone within it.
Absolutely, yeah.
So as this is our first episode recording in person with Winnie and I as co-hosts, it's also our first episode with three guests. We want to start, as always, by using the concept of fields of existence or coordinates of belonging to help share and connect with stories. We find it's a really meaningful way to set the scene for today's chats. These concepts were introduced to us by Leah from Co-Culture Communications, And they demonstrate that our beings are a field of activity made up of stories that we've been told, our ancestors that have existed, the land under our feet, and the places where we stand. And all of these forces, I guess, form who we are in this moment as contextual beings. It's a bit of a new concept for us to be introducing our guests on the couch, but I'd like to give it a go if that's okay, and get started with your story, Roxy. How do you define and locate yourself, and what are your coordinates of belonging?
So I will say I really had to kind of wrap my head around this concept. I think it's such a beautiful concept, and I really just wanted to do it justice, and I hope I did, and I hope that I do.
Sure.
But I've just kind of realised lately that I exist currently on Dharawal land in beautiful Wollongong.
Mm-hmm.
I belong because of all of the amazing queer events that we have down here. I feel like, if I'm honest, before I moved here and started doing what I do, I didn't feel like I actually fit in anywhere. And then when I found my people, it was through all of everything in Wollongong, through drag, through all of the creative queer spaces that we have down here now. But, I came from a rough area, so I grew up in Western Sydney, and it was not okay to be gay. My family were okay with it. I've always had support in that respect, but my surroundings were not okay with queerness. And to be honest, when I first moved to Wollongong, neither was Wollongong. And, there are still elements that aren't, but overall, I feel like I have a wonderful sense of belonging thanks to our region.
Yeah, beautiful. I think we might go along the line. Cherry, would you like to go next?
Of course, yeah. So I was having a good think about this one and trying to think of what would be a really good way to kind of express who I am as a person. And I am a trans woman, and I think a big part of my identity is being raised for a lot of my life as a cis boy, and having that experience of growing up and playing NRL and being socialized in that way, and having all of those kind of roles put on me. And I think that's really helped shape me in a lot of ways, and then navigating through that and finding my true identity, and then moving out of these spaces that I knew weren't for me and weren't comfortable for me, and trying to find spaces that were comfortable and supportive. And yeah, the queer scene down here has just been so huge and special for me. Really, really cool. I moved out of home when I was 14 and was sleeping kind of rough, and there was just so much support around in the community for me at the time. Very special, and very grateful that I can be a part of this place.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing. Lawrence, would you like to share your coordinates of belonging?
Yes. Well, much like Roxy, actually, I did grow up in Sydney. But I also find Wollongong to be such an important place for me. The regional town aspect really means that I feel as a community, we're so close to each other in a way that you just don't get in Sydney. And so I'm just really thankful to Dharawal, sort of Yuin country, for providing that sense of belonging. I also I'm a dyke, so I really love kind of women and, women's spaces that really operate for not just entertainment, but for liberation. And I also, I'm a cross-dresser. That's, at the end of the day, it's when I hear about things like drag bans, they're things that affect me as a drag king, but they also affect me as a butch lesbian. I walk out in men's clothes every day, and that affects me. And so I find a lot of peace and a lot of belonging in cross-dressing, especially as a term that is quite loaded. I like to identify as a cross-dresser because a lot of the time when people think cross-dresser, especially conservatives think cross-dresser, they think man in a dress, they think degenerate, they think pedophilic, they think deceptive. But I'm a woman. So when I'm cross-dressing, I'm expected to be nurturing towards children. I'm expected to be sexually available. So it's a nice way for me to take that term and ask people what they're loading into it, because, what does that mean for a woman who's a cross-dresser?
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. Would I be able to add something?
Yeah, go for it.
with what you said about being in a small town as well, I'm like 6th generation from Helensburgh. Like, I'm the 6th generation of my family to grow up in that small town in northern Illawarra. And I think that's had a huge impact on me as well. Like, living in this small town that's my family's been in for so long, we've got so much like history, and it's very small, very small. Like, they've got everything they need in the town, so no one really leaves the town. And it's like sometimes a bit of a scary kind of feeling and sense you get, because there's like no representation and no safety. Like, I remember walking around in just a tie-dye shirt and people were like staring at me, and I was like, I'm not even wearing, like, I'm not even fruity. Like, this is something chill.
Yeah.
It's very like, interesting vibe growing up in this small little rural area.
Yeah. Thank you so much for jumping in there and sharing that. And it's always such a pleasure to share and hear these stories and connect with our fields of existence. And so I'm so glad that we can spend a little bit of time here and not rush it, and really set the scene before we lead into talking about really the impact of the local drag culture. Before we get there, we might start with some basics. Drag is a performance art, a type of entertainment where people dress up to perform, to create a heightened version of masculinity, femininity, and other forms of gender expression. I will be reading a little bit for our audience here just to make sure that I'm covering everything I wanted to say. Drag performers, whether drag queens, drag kings, or drag stars, are artists. Think, as we can see, big hair, makeup, costumes, other tools to present an exaggerated form of gender expression. I read a really great line in a blog post once that said that drag critiques gender inequalities and imagines a transformational future where people are truly free in how they express themselves. And I really love that, actually. It's a real celebration for or of non-conformity, rooted in acceptance and resilience. It's an art form that represents freedom of expression and resistance to unjust forces. And for that, I would also add that the goal of drag is not just entertainment, and I'm interested in your thoughts, but I think also it's to educate, right? We didn't want this episode to be a Drag 101, a history of drag, although super interesting and important, so I don't want to brush over that. I would encourage our listeners to go back and learn more about drag through the ages, back as far as ancient Greece and Rome, because it is a really interesting history. So we know that drag performers can experience discrimination and harassment because of their gender expression. So by talking about it today and debunking some of these myths in today's episode, we can start to create that societal shift as we encourage people to move through the world with love and respect. It's very simple. One of those myths that I know, just from around and on Google, is that drag is only drag queens and that drag queens are always men performing as feminine women. I really want to debunk that myth for all of our listeners today. We know that we'll be moving into talking a little bit more about that and the intersection between drag and transgender communities. But I want to hand over to you first, Lawrence, as our drag king on the couch. We know that you have completed your thesis on drag history, which is very cool. You might have some good articles and resources to share, yes, in the show notes for our listeners. So that might be a good place to start if you are interested to go back into the history of drag. But Lawrence, can you speak to your experience as a drag king, navigating a space where drag queens are often seen as the only form of drag performance? How do you challenge this? How do you question gender stereotypes and fight for your craft in spaces where men dominate?
That's really interesting. I find that you're very right, obviously, in your depiction of drag. It is, this art form that, is meant to educate and such. But like any art form, think sculpture, painting, performance art, it is also an industry. So you're looking at, just because we're cross-dressing and because that has like leftist countercultural connotations doesn't mean that it's immune to the same social forces that affect like the art world, for example. Like if we think of famous artworks, it takes a long time to name a female artist. In the same way, it takes a long time sort of for people to think of someone, a drag queen, who's not you know, a white guy, or not, you know, a drag queen at all, like a drag artist. And so I find that it's definitely really difficult to navigate. I think that most drag artists are on Instagram. And so social media is definitely a lot of the field where I try and fight back against that. I remember, and this is absolutely no shade to my sisters here in Wollongong, but I do remember there was an incident where a regular club night sort of was doing a lot of like promotion, and they were like, we're Wollongong's most inclusive clubbing event. We have queens every fortnight. And I had only just started really doing king drag, but I was like, come on guys, like, you know, queens were getting imported from Sydney, you know, like RuPaul's Drag Race queens were getting imported. And I knew off the top of my head 5, 6, 7 amazing kings who had been doing drag for years and years. And I myself had been doing drag for 3 or 4 years at that point. And I was like, this is kind of why it's hard to get gigs, because it wasn't malicious at all, but it was forgetful. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Like, we're so on the margins. And, you know, you're also right that, you know, we're all not representing necessarily like all drag from our perspective, but it feels like every time I'm like a token king, so I have to speak for the king community every time. And so like for a long time I would have terrible stage fright before going on stage, because I felt like if I didn't do good enough, then all kings are going to be painted by the same brush. And the entire industry feels like it's almost rooting for you to fail a little bit sometimes, because, you know, if you're, and, you know, it's not like we don't want women in this industry. Like, no one's going to say that, because like I said, it does have that reputation of being countercultural and being kind of leftist, but it's couched in very like socially acceptable language, like, oh, well, it's just not as revolutionary for an AFAB queen, which is, you know, for example, a queen who's a cis woman, for the listeners. It's just not as revolutionary for her to do drag as it is for a cis man to do drag. Or if a queen is transgender, then it's like, well, she's cheating by doing hormones and getting surgery. Or if, you know, it's like, oh, drag queens just, you know, pardon me, drag kings just aren't as entertaining as drag queens because masculinity just isn't as fun. And so it's like, in many ways, you're just keeping women out of the industry. We haven't gotten past hiring a woman in a man's, you know, industry, but it is couched in ways that it's hard to sort of fight that. And I know so many, you know, kings who are told, you know, like all kings just look the same, or, you know, like they're getting paid like a third of the rate of their queen counterparts despite having larger followings online. Or I know one guy in the UK got paid £57,000 less than his drag queen co-star. And it's like, it's a pay gap. It's a pay gap, you know, in the same way that like me in the hospitality industry as a line cook, you know what I mean? It's the same kind of issues. And so there's that. There was also, I remember actually one time, your wonderful show, Drag Race Down South, just plugging that fabulous show. But all the drag kings in Wollongong are in a big group chat, and there was one episode where we were like, wow, we don't know, like, it's hard not to be paranoid. Like, was this a slight, or was it just like the way it is? If like, you know, or drag kings are kind of, you know, maligned maybe. And so because you and Ella were such huge powerhouses in the industry, there were a bunch of kings who were much newer, and I was the one who was like, okay, I'll go and message Roxy and be like, hey, like, what was the thing? Like, because they would be risking their careers, which it's already a difficult industry, you know, with like heavy producers.
Like,
yeah.
I totally see your mindset in that. But I will say I disagree with it, because if they just came to talk to me, I'm not that bitch. I'm not that bitch. I never have been. I never would be.
Yeah.
Whether I'm speaking to anybody of any walk of life, I'm very personable, very approachable.
And you were
yeah,
to me, of course.
100%,
yeah.
100%.
But it's a fear. It's a fear of speaking out. Yeah.
Totally. And that's what I'm saying. The fear is validated. I think, if I'm 100% honest, I think I'm kind of the exception with a lot of these situations. As to why I think people would think I'm not approachable, because drag, you put on a persona, you put on this character, and at the end of the day, I'm a nice bitch, but I'm a bitch, quote unquote bitch in drag. That's a persona that Roxy kind of does. But I'm actually a really nice person at my core, and once people get to actually know the person behind the persona, I think it's a big difference in relationships, but I totally get
Yeah.
why.
You're very beloved in the drag king group chat. Don't get me wrong.
Thank God, because I really don't want to
Ella
come across
wasn't.
as
Yeah.
a meanie. I'm not the Grinch, I promise.
But yeah, like it was something that happened, right? It's like, and it's the same as like Drag Expo, for example, happened in Sydney, and I went on their like story, and I was like, I'll stop going through their story when I find a king, and I got through their entire story. There was like 40 posts on their like Instagram story, and I got to the end and I was like, okay, so they're just like Drag Expo, like for
Huge.
drag, and there's no kings at all. It was so wild to me. So that's kind of, I like to kind of be quite vocal there. That's kind of how I fight it. And also as a producer, I like to do integrated shows. I think doing all king shows, I've seen it happen, but even in Sydney, you can go bankrupt just doing stuff like that. Like there's not enough of an audience for it. Like, there's plenty of, kings will show up at all queen shows, but there's not always that reciprocation. And so I always do integrated shows, first of all, because I think that there are lots of extremely talented queens and I don't want to be boring. Cherry, I booked you for my first show. Our dates haven't lined up yet. But I have been in Roxy's DMs trying to get her to work for me. But like I think it's more interesting. And I also love, actually merging our industries and trying not to be like almost like drag king separatist, because I think that we're so much more powerful when we're together. Yeah,
and I completely agree with that. And I will say though that like the world has been taught that when you hear the word drag, automatically your mind goes to drag queen. Unfortunately, that and I was even a part of that when I started drag. I didn't really I knew of drag kings. I didn't realize the plethora of drag performers. That it wasn't just as black as white as I was taught growing up. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I didn't know about drag kings when I started drag. I just thought I was cross-dressing. And I knew about drag queens, but I didn't know about drag kings.
Exactly
they were
what I mean.
so far beyond the realm of my comprehension.
Yeah. Very interesting.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing. I could just listen to you talk for so long. It's really interesting hearing the intricates of like, I guess the politics behind it, because, they're problems we face in every area of society, I think. But I do think this actually leads really nicely into drag offering a space for gender presentations outside that strict binary, and also regardless of how a performer identifies off stage. We've heard and have seen the drag community being that safe and affirming space to explore gender identity and expression, and for some drag may be an integral part of like a coming out journey. It is a common Google question: are drag queens trans? Are drag queens gay? And we'll get into talking about that when we talk about the queer community in a moment. But we wanted to specifically give some time and space to the trans community. And rather than us talking about this, we would like to hand over to you. But Cherry, can you share some of your thoughts and your experiences that you feel comfortable sharing? How does the drag community offer safe spaces for the exploration of gender identity and expression?
Absolutely. I'm like really excited for this question. I've been thinking about it a lot. And like, I do want to start by saying, like we mentioned earlier, I obviously can't talk on the behalf of like the entire trans community. Everyone has such like unique experiences and journeys that they go through. But for me personally, like, the drag community has been so huge in helping me find myself. Like, I remember when I was just like a little kid dressing up in my mum and my auntie's clothes and like putting on lipstick, putting fruit in a bra and like being silly and loving every minute of it. And like, that was my first introduction to drag. But I really started experimenting with drag and using it as a tool for my self-expression and like journey in finding myself when I was around 14. And it was so powerful finding like such a safe community that nurtured me so nicely and well. Like, you can walk into an event, into a space, introduce yourself with any name, any pronouns, and it just be accepted and just like completely without any kind of judgment or preconceived idea of who you are as a person. You can really kind of like recreate yourself and be who you want to be, not who you're perceived as in other kind of circles. And I think that's something that's really powerful.
That was a really good point what you just said. That was like really, I knew you kind of made the penny drop for me. Then like, we really do get to create who we want to be fully. And I the penny dropped for me just then.
Thank you. And I think it's like super powerful to like go into a space and a group of people who don't know anything about you, but you have that connection and that community. Like, they're people who can relate to you and have similar experiences and struggles. And I think it's powerful to be able to create the person you want to be without having these preconceived kind of like ideas that other people put onto you. Drag's also been a really beautiful tool for me to explore my identity, because it was like a safe space for me to try new things and explore new things without the judgment of it being real, or like I could put it on as a mask when it was safe to explore it and take it off when it wasn't as safe to be expressing myself like that. And the drag community and queer community as a whole, I think, has been such a warm and welcoming space. I've moved through so many names and pronouns myself, so many questionable hairstyles and fugly outfits, and everyone's just accepted it and accepted me with every change and every step closer to finding who I am.
I remember Maud.
Not Maud!
Remember little
Not
baby Maud.
Maud! No, don't bring her up. No. Yeah, for a hot minute, my name was Maud-ified.
Oh.
She was a
Girl
little
boss.
spooky baby.
It was also Violet Crumble, which is kind of slay.
Violet Crumble is a
Yeah.
slay.
But I do also want to say, like, some of my trans sisters have never been involved in the drag community at all. So, like, obviously not every trans woman is a drag queen and not every drag queen is trans. But I do think those events can be really powerful for people who want to experience them and find that community in that way. Yeah.
Do you want to talk a little bit about the event spaces that you are? No, you're so fine. The event spaces that you are creating, like you were talking about bringing together community, and I know, you know, with your music in the music scene and the DJ stuff that you do. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So, like, something I've always been really passionate about is community and finding community and bringing community together. I produced my first show when I was 15 because I had no other shows that I could go to. There was no other spaces that I was really allowed in as being at such a young age. So I created my own spaces, and Roxy performed. I had like a huge lineup of really cool performers, and it was really special. And then from there, I started bringing more different, diverse communities together. When I was 16, I got super into the local music scene in Wollongong, and I was really surprised that in the Wollongong punk scene that everyone was so nice to a little gender freak like me. Like, it was so heartwarming, and I thought, well, I like this music, I like these drag performers, I'm going to smash them together. And I put on this show called Cherry Tuesdays, and it was in a little art studio. It was really cool. And it was a space for people who were under 18 to come and experience culture of, like, both Wollongong's music scene that's so rich and the beautiful drag scene. I think that was really powerful. And then moving forward, I've really gotten into, like, DJing. It's been so much fun. I was, like, going through a pretty rough time at the end of 2023, and I picked up my DJ decks and, like, really, really helped me. I would recommend DJing to anyone. It's so much fun. Yeah, and I think that's been a new way that I've been able to try and bring community together. I recently had a big fundraiser to go towards my gender-affirming care surgeries, and I put on a big drag doof with DJs and drag performers, and it was really beautiful seeing that, like, sense of community coming together and being able to express yourself freely in a safe space outside the boundaries that normal society kind of puts on us.
Yeah, I just think that's really important when we're talking about community and kind of moving into, I guess, yapping a little bit more around sexuality within drag culture. So the term drag is often associated with gay and queer culture, but I'd like to open this up a little bit more to thinking outside of the assumptions that drag is only for the LGBTQIA plus community. We have seen this shift and rise of drag in a more, I guess, mainstream popular culture. So I'm thinking back historically with its underground LGBTQIA plus roots and now to this visibility in this wider cultural landscape through shows like RuPaul's Drag Race, best-selling books from well-known names like Courtney Act, and I'm sure our listeners have heard of local drag lip-sync battles, drag shows, drag drag bingo, drag brunches, drag story times popping up in libraries across the country. I'm going to move over to you, Roxy. Can you share some of your thoughts around this progression that you've seen and the acceptance and celebration of drag in a wider audience and this increasing social acceptance? And I want to give a little bit of space here to share how that hasn't always been the case and how, unfortunately, we still see drag fetishized, attacked and stigmatized. So I want to hand over to you and just talking about a little bit more about that. Yeah.
What I've been trying to say this whole time, so RuPaul's Drag Race. Mm-hmm. RuPaul's Drag Race is the number one factor as to why drag is where it is today. Growing up, I was exposed to drag. I watched Rocky Horror Picture Show. I watched Priscilla, Tu Wong Fu, Mrs. Doubtfire. I grew up with these as my favourite movies. I was always into movies where people gender swapped, like The Hot Chick and Dating the Enemy. Always intrigued by that. But I had to actively source that out. As a youngin', I saw it online on SBS late one night. I saw Dating the Enemy, and it was an Aussie movie with Claudia Carvin and Guy Pearce, and they do a gender swap. And I'd never seen anything like that before. I'd never been exposed to that. Nowadays, though, you just walk down the street and there are drag performers on posters in Wollongong, in Sydney, everywhere. So automatically, I think that puts us in people's minds straight away. So that's a positive thing. In saying that too, though, I think that Drag Race has kind of, I'm probably going to get shot for saying this, ruined drag in so many ways. I love drag. I love drag because of Priscilla. I love drag that's a little bit busted, that's a little bit rough, a little bit spooky. Drag Race is all about being this perfectly polished product of RuPaul. And if you don't fit into that, then you're not a good drag queen. And I feel like it's different with people like the mainstream media in comparison to the queer media, because queer people live this stuff daily. We get to see drag and queer spaces thrive, whereas it's in our own little bubble. So like, everyone, like I've been to events with both of you many times, and there's never an issue. We are thriving, we are living. But I could be at that same event and walk downstairs at a club and be ostracized for looking the way that I look. So I do think, although yes, it has come so far thanks to RuPaul's Drag Race, we are still lucky to live in the bubble we live in. As soon as that bubble pops, all hell can break loose. And I often forget that sometimes because I've been so embraced by drag in Wollongong over the past 9 years. But it's because I'm going to events where I'm wanted. I'm going to events where people are expecting to see drag there. So yes, drag has gotten progressively in the eyes of people so much more in the world. But is it getting better? Honestly, no, it's probably not. It's getting better in your safe spaces.
Real.
I will not walk down the street in full drag on my own in Wollongong and say that I feel 100% safe.
Absolutely.
You know? So yes, I guess the main thing that I take away from this is we are getting a lot more exposure, but that's not necessarily making it safer for us, if that makes sense.
It's so fascinating. Like, I mean, I did do a thesis, but it was about drag kings specifically. And I've found that throughout the 20th century, gender nonconformity is actually very common. You see white chicks, you see jokes about people being transgender in all sorts of like 2000s, comedies, but it's the butt of the joke. So we have been in the public eye for a long time. There is a great fascination in our culture with gender nonconformity, but there is a line. There's a line where if you are too gender nonconforming, particularly if it's in your pedestrian life, me as a butch lesbian, you as a trans woman, Roxy, you even as a gay man, it's like it absolutely, there is a line that gets crossed. And you saw the same thing earlier, like in the 1950s, actually from the 1890s, well into the 60s, there were male impersonators who would have been millionaires accounting for inflation, of course, based off of being male impersonators. But these were middle-class women with husbands and children, and they could rely on having that and then the novelty of being like a woman dressed as a man. Whereas the butch lesbians and the transmasculine people in the dyke clubs who were doing sort of the same thing, kind of like male impersonation, but much more intense, erotic, embodied, they were being raided by the police. They were being their names and their headshots were being put in the news the next day. And so it's like there's always a line where if you cross it, that's when you get victimized. But as I said, the culture has an extremely common and, you know, natural obsession with gender nonconformity. But usually you have to be making fun of women, you have to be making fun of trans people, you have to be, you know, cis and straight to get away with it. And, you know, and a lot of people make a lot of money off of making fun of people like us while still doing what we have originated.
But it's so interesting because, yes, people have made so much money over making fun of us, but that was also the only representation we had in media. So quite often I look back on these movies that I watch now with a completely different viewpoint, going like, oh my God, I felt seen from that. Like it's really sad when you think about it like that.
It's such a low bar. Yeah, absolutely.
Real.
Yep.
And with what you were saying earlier about drag's definitely come so far and become a lot more mainstream and accepted in certain spaces.
That's the main,
in certain spaces. Like, I feel like there is a really widespread perception of the public right now that this is like the safest time to be trans, the safest time to be queer. Everyone's so accepting. You're not allowed to be transphobic. You're not allowed to disagree with people's pronouns. But because there's been that huge uprise in acceptance, there's been the same, if not more, uprise in that opposition to that. And we've seen like huge, like a rise in fascism and the far right becoming a lot bigger and like more prevalent and powerful. And that's scary. Like,
very scary.
I'm now being booked for like rock shows and metal shows, and I'm the only drag performer with these like heavy hardcore bands, which is so cool to see. But in those spaces, like you said, people aren't expecting to see a drag queen. There's a drag queen there, but they're not expecting it. They don't know how to act around a drag queen. And I know we'll touch on consent and things a bit more, but like at events like that, that's where I get touched, and that's where I don't feel always super safe in those environments. And walking home from the gig, I live really close to a lot of the venues in Wollongong, so I just walk home. But you're so right, it's not like a fun, safe walk home. It's like always looking over your shoulder and making sure I'm putting on like the most concealing clothes I can. And there is definitely a lot of great movement and positivity that's come from Drag Race and the exposure that that's brought us. But I think with that, there's also that opposition that's come in, and people are pushing back against it, and they don't want to see it.
Even just touch on quickly about what you were saying about like walking, feeling like unsafe. Even out of drag, I still kind of butch it up if I'm on my own, especially at night in Wollongong. If a bunch of boys are walking towards me, drag or not, I try and somehow make myself look straighter or act straighter, just so I don't fear being hit or ostracized. So that's not only a drag thing, that's just very much a queer thing as well. I think it's heightened by drag. I'm much more susceptible to an attack in drag than out of drag. However, there's only been one situation where I have been, I would say, gay bashed. I wasn't in drag. That had nothing to do with me being drag. It was just me being an overtly gay man. So it's interesting, like the only hardship that I faced in Wollongong when it comes to that stuff wasn't even Roxy. It was me out of drag, which is so interesting, I find.
That's interesting.
I think I might kind of circle around into talking about, I guess, thinking about drag and its diversity in reaching a wider audience, that conversation we were having just before, but also thinking about drag stars that wouldn't otherwise be in the LGBTQIA plus community. So we're talking about cis-het and men and women, so cis-het meaning cisgendered and heterosexual. Can you speak a little bit more about this? I know that there's lots of conversations about this, right?
I mean, we can imagine, as we were saying, there's many different perspectives around this in the community as well.
And so thinking about, is it a positive thing because it's becoming more celebrated and an accepted art form, or is it discouraged because there's this view that cis-het people are taking places of those who are LGBTQIA plus community members? So it's a really interesting, I want to say debate or a conversation, and there probably is no right or wrong answer to this. So I think maybe if you could talk us through the difference between cis-het men and women allies who are respectfully advocating for trans rights, for example, and taking this art form seriously and are accepted part in the drag culture, in comparison to, say, cis-het men at parties wearing bras to be a joke, as you were talking about before, Lauren. So these are really big questions, I know, but I'll hand over to you all to kind of unpack this, maybe starting with you, Roxy, if that's...
Yeah, awesome. This is a really, really tricky one. This one is hard because I see both sides of it, but I've also had very in-depth conversations with people on opposite end of the spectrum here. I've had people who do not want straight people in queer spaces at all, hands down, foot down. They shouldn't be there because they aren't queer people. But then I'm also a firm believer of, like, if it weren't for the allies, we wouldn't have a lot of the spaces that we have today. So when it comes to straight people in queer spaces, it's a struggle to kind of tether the line of, like, are these people coming here, A, because they want to make fun of us? Are they coming here because it's a new experience for them? Or are they coming here because they're curious themselves? So I think the word straight is so hard because I identify as gay, but I am not the gayest person you'll ever meet. I have been with women. I will probably continue to be with women for my life. I just identify as gay. However, there are straight people that come to these events who do identify as straight and maybe dress up at home behind closed doors because they're too scared, they haven't had an outlet, and these spaces are the outlet for them. It's different if they're coming here, like, as you said, wearing a bra and a dirty wig, being like, gay. Very different, very different. I don't want them people in my venues at all, at all. But if I have someone who's genuinely there as an ally or genuinely there because they're questioning something within themselves, I don't want to turn that away. I don't want to turn that away because there are dickheads who will ruin it for other people. I want to embrace that. I have seen so many people who I've met in the last, I'd say, 8 years, who are different people from who they are from when I met them today. And that is because they have been embraced. Cherry Ripe is a prime example.
Absolutely.
Exhibit A. Cherry, I have watched her grow and blossom into this beautiful young woman. And when I met her, completely different.
Yeah.
And, I don't think you would have ever identified as straight. But you coming to the spaces when you first did, you were young.
Yeah.
You were obviously within the queer realm, but you didn't know you were trans.
Yeah, no way.
You kind of found yourself through that. So if I denied Cherry from coming to my bingos back in the day, who's to say that Cherry wouldn't have found herself? Now, I know that that's not the case at all.
No,
that's not what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It's just what I'm trying to say is that these events that straight people come to could be the thing that changes their life and the progression of their life.
Real.
And that's why I think it's important to allow it, but be mindful of it. If you do have people who aren't taking it seriously and are making a mockery of it, don't have them in the events. Get them out straight away. You don't want them there.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But it's kind of how I see it.
Absolutely. And I think, it is a hard one because I've also, had conversations with people where they're so firm on, straight people don't belong in queer spaces. These are our spaces that we've created because we can't just go to any club in Wollongong. We can't just go out every night, get drunk and be safe. We have these clubs because we need them.
Yeah.
And seeing 50% of the population in the club being straight white blonde girls who just want to see a drag queen dance on stage is sometimes yes, you deserve to have fun and witness our community, but be respectful and don't take space from people in our community. Especially one thing that's really stands out for me is the Mardi Gras parade. I've been to the Mardi Gras parade maybe 6 years in a row, and it's just not good. Like, it's just not good.
Yeah.
There are elements of it that are so amazing and so beautiful. And I went to my first parade when I was 14 and I was blown away at how many queer people there were in Sydney. I like coming from this small town in Wollongong, going up and seeing like this enormous street full of beautiful queer people expressing them how they want to. But then like as I got older and seeing like the masses of straight people who were coming and like having a laugh, having a look, maybe they are being supportive, but still it's like I've gone and I've been 5 rows from the back not being able to see the parade because there's all of these people here when it's made for us and we don't get to experience it because of them. So I think I'm not saying they don't belong in our spaces at all, full stop. I just think it's really important for cis and het people to be respectful and mindful in our spaces of how they're acting and how they're taking up space.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, especially like, I mean, as a freshly minted producer, you could say, doing it for like a year or so, it's like we can't afford really to deny entrance to straight people, no matter how much we want to, you know, in some cases. But it's also like as drag performers and even as, you know, queer people who, you know, as we say, like, don't feel confident maybe walking out, being ourselves on the street. When we're in our own spaces, confidence is like our most prized possession. And so to be looked at like a zoo animal, it really actually it taints those spaces. So it is so important for like, you know, I'm not advocating obviously that every straight person has to wear like a visitor's badge when they come into Gay Day, but I am saying that like you have to, you know, if you're bringing your friends, if you're bringing your co-workers, like come for a laugh, come to my friend's thing, then you are responsible that, you know, that's like, you know, your wild dog. You have to keep that thing on a leash.
Yeah.
The thing is too, though, living in like a regional town, we don't anymore have a queer venue, full stop. So if we have a problem with straight people coming to our events, every single one of us run events at straight venues. There is no way around that because the venues that we work at down here are straight. It's not like we don't have the luxury of having 5 gay clubs in one place up in Sydney where you can be safe and then straight people come into your space. We're technically infiltrating the straight spaces down here, and you know, sometimes we get embraced by the people that are coming to it, but sometimes we do not, and that's just the hard thing about doing that and not having a hub for queer people.
I think that moves very nicely into discussing consent, which you touched on a bit before, Cherry. And I know that when we first met, this is something that came up and was a pretty big topic that we wanted to discuss. You all raised concerns, and particularly concerns over performers, but also performers and audiences, members too, everyone's safety. In particular, consent when performing and the common experience of people touching drag stars thinking that it is accepted and that consent somehow doesn't matter in this space when it really does. And just because a drag performer dresses or acts a certain way doesn't mean that they want to be touched, and practicing consent in this performance space is just as important as any other space. It's about mutual respect and open communication and ensuring safety of drag stars and their audience. For our listeners, we do have episodes on the couch focusing on consent, such as our episode with Dr. Joy Townsend, CEO and founder of Learn and Consent, discussing consent and pleasure, and another episode with Axel Nathaniel Rose discussing trans healthcare and medical consent. So we'd really recommend you to go back and give those a listen. So opening up to anyone who would like to share their thoughts on consent in drag performance spaces, and what are some key points that you would like our listeners to take away?
I'm happy to start off with this one.
By all means.
Because I feel like it's a little bit different for me personally because when I'm in drag, most of my outfits, the only part of my natural skin that is exposed are my fingertips, literally. I have fake boobs, usually a corset, fake hips, 4 or 5 pairs of stockings, sometimes a breastplate on. If someone grabs any part of me, I don't feel it. So I am personally not affected by it. It's the premise of it. So I often will welcome it as Roxy. It's very much part of my shtick when I'm in drag. But it depends on the person and it depends on the situation. If someone's going to come at me and just grab me, even if I can't feel it without consent, if their intention is not good, then I'm going to have a problem with it. But also, I have my drag partner that I work with all the time, Ella. She has her boobs and butt pretty much exposed, and that's all hers. If you touch that, you're touching her skin, her body. Whereas someone come up to me drunk, grab my boob, I won't feel it. They could do the exact same thing to Ella next to me, and then there's a problem. So that's where it's a really tricky situation for me personally, because I think when it comes to taking drag out of it, consent is sexy, and in drag, consent is sexy. Yeah. But I just struggle with it for me because I'm not feeling anything. I don't feel objectified when you grab my padding or when you grab my rice in my boobs. Do you know what I mean? It's really hard because I don't have any of my body on display. If I didn't wear hip pads and didn't wear a bra or whatever, I would feel very different about this. I would like to make that very clear. I only feel the way that I do because nothing that you see on Roxy is real. Not one part of me is real. You can touch all the fakeness. If I had all of my natural body on display, I think I would have a very, very big, very, very different view on this. That's why I wanted to go first, because it's a bit of a different take with me.
It is really interesting because I think it's also, it is part of Roxee Horror, but it's welcomed and it's invited. And so, if you're saying to an audience member, you can grab my, hip padding, my butt, my hip padding, then that's okay. But if, you might not feel someone touch you inappropriately, but then the people who are watching that are seeing that that's okay, right?
That's exactly right.
Then it's creating this culture of that, that's something that you can do here. You can do that to Roxy Horror. Could I do that to Cherry Ripe?
Yeah.
And that's where it's such a blurry line,
And in continuing on with that, I think it's something like, I'm one of the queens that I do wear pads and stuff sometimes, but not all the time. I do sometimes get my bare ass out, and I'd be doing hot shit on stage sometimes. So I understand that I can be sexualized and perceived in a sexual way by the audience through some of my performances, and that is the goal of some of my performances. Obviously, not all of them. I'm also very silly sometimes, but I think with that as well, I've been. People have grabbed me on my crotch, on my bare bum, and really kind of just not cool stuff in these spaces where, and not even just in event spaces, but on my way home, at Macca's, just getting my food and people coming around, and also I don't think it's the people listening to this podcast that need to hear this and be told this, right? I'm sure all of our listeners are beautiful, lovely people who are aware of this and aware of what is right and wrong. But there is that wider community that I think can see drag performers as sexual objects that are there to kind of be enjoyed as entertainment. And I don't know, it is very tough.
I will just add to that too that I personally, in or out of drag, am a very sex positive person. I'm a very sexual person. Everyone who knows Roxy knows that about me. So for me at these events, I'm just like that. That's it. I'm very over sexualized. Obviously, I know my boundaries with people, but when you're saying doing numbers and that, most of my numbers have something to do with something stupid and something sexual. Yeah. That's Roxy's shtick. So, often I'll bring someone up on stage and I'll drink a glass of water and spit out the water, making it look like something else. Yeah. People expect that with Roxy, but if someone just comes up to me and starts macking on me in the middle of a club, very different situation to me bringing someone up on stage, and kind of pre-telling them I'm going to do this to you on stage. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Because you're asking for their consent as
Oh,
well.
100%.
Yeah.
It goes two ways. It
it's-
goes.
Yeah.
I learned early on in drag that with my numbers, especially if I'm getting right up and personable with people, that not everybody wants that. And I kind of thought, because being someone who like always wanted to be involved if I went to a show, no matter what, I wanted to be put up on stage. I just kind of assumed that was like a nature in a lot of people. So yeah, I've learned early on with my drag performances and that like if I'm planning to do something that's a little bit risque, I will definitely have the consent from the person prior and will make sure they know fully what's going to happen.
Absolutely. Because I've seen in the past drag performers do things on the fly and interact with the audience without consent, and that is terrifying. As an audience member, being interacted with, touched, like flipping this on the other end, you know, like because we get touched, but flipping it on the other end as a drag audience member, being touched and interacted with when you don't want to be is terrifying.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's definitely so important to like have that
both ways.
communication and conversation.
I mentioned this before we started recording, but I feel like it's almost the nature that because we're such like a nocturnal community, we are operating in clubs where, you know, everyone's an adult, so, you know, booze is, you know, flowing. And so, you know, yeah, people may act like we are there for sexual gratification, act with lowered inhibitions because, you know, it's hard for us to go out in the day. First of all, because of the weather. Like, today was just don't get me started. But also just because, yeah, it's you know, it's harder to, you know, public displays of affection with your partner, being gender nonconforming in the daylight, in public, but in the safety of our clubs where we know everyone's of age and we can let down our inhibitions. That's a beautiful thing for our community. But because that is the area, it also means that people are less responsible with social etiquette and the way that they treat the people who are entertaining them.
Absolutely.
I guess that's an interesting note. I'll just add from your comment there, Lawrence, to Roxy's comment before about how there isn't a queer club here.
Yeah, there's
You
no queer
are
cafes.
in-
There's no queer
like
venues.
You are in the straight venues.
Yeah.
And so people are coming to those venues, maybe not even aware that there's actually a queer event on.
Not expecting
And they're
to
going,
see drag
oh,
queens.
let's, you know, like that.
Yeah.
I think that's, really good point.
That's the one thing that I've noticed from the beginning of, like, when I started drag in Wollongong, there was 1-2 events every 2-3 months. At the top of the tennis club in, like, rural, like, middle of Wollongong. That's where I got my outlet of drag. Also a straight venue, though. But now, 9 years later, we've got sometimes upwards of 6 events at a time in Wollongong.
Yeah.
And it's just really cool, to see that growth, but from the beginning, we haven't had a queer space. We haven't. Our queer spaces were at straight venues for the past 10 years. We had Castro's before that. That failed. That was around for a while. They got rid of drag queens. They put in go-go dancers, and then it just flopped. And we never got another venue since. Before that, it was Checkers in the 80s. Drag was thriving in Checkers.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's very interesting when you think about Wollongong and drag within Wollongong. I feel like we're the current generation of drag in Wollongong, but they've been around. They've been around for all of these years. I recently was chatting to 2 of the queens, who you've met them before as well, Miss Cara Van Park and Miss Dee Dee Lamar.
Icons.
They are 2 queens who worked locally in Wollongong in the 80s and 90s, and they come to events now and stuff like that, and I just love having chats to them about how much the scene's changed for them. But even saying that, they had a queer venue that they got to work at when they were young. It's so baffling to me that in the 90s and the early 2000s there was a queer venue here with no scene, and now there is a big scene and no venue. It's like it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, make
it make sense.
Make it make sense.
Who's starting that?
Anyone listening?
I promise.
Drag is a
Anyone
very
out there?
expensive art
Yeah.
form to take part in. It's like, it's, you know, starting up a club
Yeah.
when we're already paying for like well, what you can see right
Yeah.
now. It's
Very expensive.
Very few people are making a lot of money off of drag.
Oh, it's literally, and like I was looking at the potential of if I could even look at opening up a club down here years ago, just not feasible as a drag queen on a drag queen salary, and even someone who's worked hard to get the rate that I get paid today. I was doing gigs for $50 when I first started. There is no way that I could run one of these things.
I just think, having a space like that would open up so many doors for a lot of people. And I'm thinking even in terms of like a hireable space for things like this, having a live studio audience, having, a podcast space, it's like the nocturnal stuff that you were talking about, but also those like community spaces that are safe and
especially for young people who might not be of age to enter clubs as well.
Absolutely. I think there's such a huge need. I think I'm hearing like I'm talking to a lot of people in the community and so many people are calling out for it. I think it's just the money.
Yeah.
And especially for a space where, where you can have sexual health resources and mental health services linked in, and a space that is, alcohol and drug free for people who need that. It could really.
I never actually thought of that. That is so important. That is something that a lot of our events are heavily centered around alcohol. I never thought, as ignorant as it is, the sober people to come and enjoy drag who don't want to be put in those spaces.
Yeah. I think about Hannah Gadsby in, what was the first? Nanette. Where she talks about the sound of that, like the pride flag is too busy and too much is going on, and she prefers the sound of her teacup finding its way on the saucer. And I thought, oh my gosh, there is this whole community of people who are like, actually, going to a club's a bit much. I'd like to be in bed by 9 with my cup of tea, and I don't want to be excluded from the queer community because that's who I am. I love the little side quest that we went on. So for any listeners who might have a spare, couple of $1 million.
Throw it our way.
Let us know. We can hook you up with some connections. Okay, I want to move into a potential question which we haven't talked about before. So if we talk about it here and we're wanting to cut it, that's fine. It was just an idea that kind of came up when we were talking about this morning, and when we were talking about consent and being approached. And I thought, what about when you're outside of drag and you're going grocery shopping and somebody approaches you and is just like, oh my God, you're Roxee Horror. And then, well, where's the consent? What's appropriate? What's not appropriate? What is that like being approached? And is that something that happens?
It is something that happens, funnily enough, which is mind-boggling to me. Like, I don't understand it. But I think it can go two ways. I've had situations at nightclubs where people have seen me out of drag and realised that I was Roxy, and they would be ignoring me the whole night, and as soon as they realise I'm Roxy, they are my best friend.
Interesting.
I don't like that. No. I do not vibe with that at all. You know what I mean? Not me. I've also had people at nightclubs who are so drunk, and when they realize that you are Roxy or you are the drag performer they think you are, they try and hug you and they pull your wig, out of drag, different situation. But when you're in drag, I hate it when I get a hug in drag and my wig gets pulled back. Biggest pet peeve.
Take note, listeners.
Take note. If you hug a drag queen, do it like that. Don't actually make contact.
Air hugs and air even kisses. Better because we are hot.
I've just lost my train of thought, but I had a really good point. There was can you say what you said again to me?
You were talking about when you're in a club and somebody approaches you.
Oh, and it can go two ways.
Yes.
So I've had the really positive experiences, though, where I went to McDonald's once. This is my favourite story. Just ordering my Maccas in Wollongong, and I was wearing a shirt, which was my old YouTube shirt that had a picture of me in drag on it. and it was called Word Vomit. And she goes, "Oh, Word Vomit, I love Roxy." And then I thought she was saying that because she realised I was Roxy. And my quote as Roxy is, "Stop it." So I said to her, "Oh, stop it." And she goes, and then just started bawling her eyes out. Her manager had to come over and take over the sale.
Oh my God.
I just walked away from that on such a high.
wow.
Like, it made me feel so special that I evoked that feeling in somebody. But that's what I mean. So I hate it in clubs when someone's drunk and they don't want to buy a view till they realise who you are. But I love it when you get the genuine people who are just like, "Oh my God, I can't believe I'm actually getting to see you."
Yeah.
It is baffling though, because I've just been having fun with my friends for the past 8 years. There is in my mind, no possibility of a celebrity status within Roxy. So I don't understand how that happens, but it still feels really nice. It still feels really good.
Yeah, it's pretty slay when it does happen. Like, there's definitely that duality there of like, I've recently moved and am living in central Wollongong. So sometimes it'll be like 9 a.m, like I'll wake up, big night before, had a gig the night before. I'm going down. I just want to get like a coffee or a bloody banh mi from the bakery. I am looking rough, like rugged. I don't want to be recognized. Like, do not talk to me. I'm getting my food. I'm going home. I'm going back to bed. And there's like that where I have been recognized. And I'm like, oh my God, like not this, like not this. But then there's other moments where like, I remember back like earlier on in my drag career, I was just like running for a train or something. I would think I was running away from the train to like I was rushing somewhere. And there was just this woman at the train station. She was like, "That's Cherry Rye." And I was like, "What the hell?" It was great. I was like, "Oh, I'm famous."
You know what, though? You are so
passion.
identifiable with your hair
It's
as
my
well.
hair.
Like
I
your
don't know.
hair,
Yeah.
because
I
you
don't know.
use it in and out of drag,
Yeah.
and even as you DJ.
Yeah.
I think that whether you've got a full mugget or not, from like 500 meters away, you just see Cherry Wright walking down.
I love.
That's so fierce. I mean, I feel lucky that like the audience that I've curated are usually really lovely. So I feel like I don't get many people who are like you're not really going to get a lot of clout as a drag king. So it's like, I feel like there's not really people who are like, "Oh my God, you're Lawrence of Australia. Can you book me?" Like, no, I'm barely making rent. But I know that it actually has been really positive at like my workplace, because I'm a line cook, which is, a bit of a blokey job, and I work with a lot of blokes. And even in the hospitality industry at large, you get like, I wanted a woman I want a man for this job, but you'll have to you'll have to impress me. And it's like uphill battle kind of thing. But then there was a bloke at work who was like, "Hey, I saw your poster around the uni. You're, Lawrence of Australia." And I was like, "Yeah, that is me." And he's like, "Oh, cool. And you could tell he was trying to like connect with me. So he was like, "So you're watching the most recent season of Drag Race?" And I was like, "Yeah." "Who are you rooting for?" And he's like, "Oh, Susie too." Anyway, but it was like a sense of like connection, building that kind of thing. So it is nice to be visible sometimes and recognizable, I find. Yeah.
Very that.
And the one thing that I don't know if you realise it yourself, but like just you being Lawrence in Wollongong is so important for people that might not even tell you about it.
Real.
Do you know what I mean?
So real.
if you don't have like, I'm saying don't discount yourself, because I guarantee you that people are having these same epiphanies with you, but are too scared to come and say it to you.
Oh.
Guarantee it.
I'm glad I have a resting bitch face. Maybe.
Oh no! I didn't.
No. I prefer it as a woman. I prefer to be like, "Don't try it." You know what I mean?
I mean, but it's even, if somebody runs into you, in the shops or in, wherever you are, and are they going to call you Lawrence? Are they going to call you Isabel? Are they like, how do they engage in that way? And do they just freak out and be like, "Oh my God, I think that's Lawrence"? I don't know how to approach them. Do I talk to them in their drag king name or as who they are right now? And so it's like maybe that just doesn't happen because people aren't sure. And so I think that's part of breaking that down and that barrier down for our audience of listeners. How would you want them to approach you, I guess? Like,
That's a good question.
With love.
Yeah.
That's like literally, like, I don't care what
Beautiful.
you've got to say as long as you're coming with love. Like, you know what I mean? If they aren't, anyone who approaches Roxy, come and say hello. I'm going to say hello back. If you come and be nasty to me, I'm going to treat you the same way you're treating me. So, like, I take that element in every aspect of life, not just drag. But, yeah, so anyone listening, if you want to come and say hello to Roxy, don't be afraid to do it. Just be nice about it.
Yeah, and same. Like, I also am like learning that I'm quite visually impaired, and I've got glasses, but I don't always wear them. And often when I'm out and about, people will recognize me and like wave at me, but I'll be like so like trying to squint my eyes and be like, "Who is that?" Like, we're like, "Hey," but like I don't know who you are. Like, yeah, I don't know. As long as it's like warm and nice, and maybe like chill. Like,
Chill.
don't always be like, "Oh my god!"
Yeah,
Like, if I'm just going in the shops, like, don't be screaming at me.
Yes.
Like, but like, say hi. I love. It's
I'm
always
the opposite.
nice to
Oh my
like.
god, I would love if you screamed at me like I was a celebrity. I would love that. I would love to be treated like Paris Hilton.
Point and
But I mean, and I
scream.
can't speak for anyone else, but like the line between Isabella and Lawrence is so blurred that if you come up and use, you know, he, him pronouns and Lawrence, like that's completely fine with me. If you know me in real life and you're like, oh, Isabella, well, then you're not recognizing me out of drag, of course. So like, I completely understand if people would use my drag name and be like, oh, that's you. But I don't. I see people who come to my drag bingo and I will smile at them on the street and they will not clock me at all.
How powerful is that? How
Yeah,
powerful. It's like my
I feel like
favorite.
such a good makeup artist when that happens. I'm
It's
like,
so
ooh,
exciting.
I've contoured Isabella right out. Yeah.
I used to work at the brewery for 4 years in Wollongong, and towards the end of my time there, I came out of drag to pick up one of my bags that I left there, and the guy who I'd worked with, who'd seen me every single Thursday for 4 years, was like, "Oh, hi, how can I help you?" And I was like, "I'm here to pick up my stuff." He's like, "Oh, that's Roxy's stuff," and I was like, "I am Roxy." I literally went, "Oh," and the penny dropped. But it's so interesting when people do not know, don't recognize you out of drag.
Yeah.
I want to bring us back to talking about the local drag community and its really, I guess, meaningful impacts. So you all, I know you all have stories to share about times where in your work drag has led to trans allyship, unofficial mentorship of LGBTQIA plus community members, connectors to sexual health information, resources and services, and of course advocacy for social issues, highlighting gender inequality, housing insecurity, HIV stigma, anti-LGBTQIA plus violence and economic disenfranchisement. Economic disenfranchisement. And economic disenfranchisement. So again, I want to open this question up to whoever would like to share the impacts of local drag culture on community.
1,000,000%. I think it's so important and so huge. Like me, myself, when I first came into the community and the scene, like I mentioned earlier, like I was super young and like living out of home, trying to like navigate this big wide world at like such a young age, and it was scary. But I had so much love and support. Like this bitch right next to me, Roxee Horror, was there from the get-go. Like I have an official drag mother who's now retired. Her name's the fabulous Miss Patsy Declined.
Miss Patsy.
And we're now adopted drag mother. And like so many other people in the queer community as well have done so much for me in giving me a safe place to sleep when I needed it, giving me advice when I didn't have anyone else to go to, when my family didn't understand what was going on. And our community are the ones that have that shared experience that you can lean on when you need support. And then growing up and finding myself and finding my feet, and now having younger queer people come and looking up to me now is crazy. Like I've got a few like friends who are 18 and like younger, and having them kind of like see me as like how I saw Roxy almost is like bonkers. But there's power in it, and I think it's important to like recognize that and honor that. Like I think being visibly queer is so important, and it's so hard sometimes because there is that backlash, and like I still get yelled at out of cars when I'm walking down the street, and like people still try and pick fights with me or like say shit. Like I still get that backlash. But I think being visibly queer and showing yourself in these everyday public places makes it feel more okay for younger generations who are coming through to see like, oh, like she looks like that. I think that's cool. Maybe I want to look like that. And it's okay to want to be like that and be different. And I think there's heaps of power in that.
Even on the opposite end of the spectrum, you're saying as a young queer person, as an older queer person, I came into the queer scene at 27. I was in a monogamous relationship from 17 to 27. Me and my ex, we were together for 10 years. When he and I broke up, I didn't know anybody. I didn't have queer friends. We lived in our own little bubble. So all of a sudden, I didn't know what community was. I didn't grow up with a queer community. I grew up with a young person who was queer, and we kind of found queerness through each other. So different to actually finding a queer community. So I genuinely thank Wollongong. As I said at the start, with the whole coordinates of belonging thing, I really struggled with that, trying to wrap my head around it. Yeah. But at its core, I am who I am. I belong because of the queer community in Wollongong. Even though I'm moving to Queensland soon, which is going to be really sad. But I owe everything to Wollongong's queer community, because I, as an older person, not just coming out. I'd already done the coming out stuff. I did that back when I was 14. Like I'd done that, but I didn't have a space when I was single for the first time at 27. So that I feel like that's really important for all ages, not just young.
Even beyond our own community, like I remember my second ever gig was through you and Pablo actually at Port Kembla for funding the Fireys when the fires were raging in early 2020. We were both in that show, and obviously so were you. And so it's like, it's not just a case of like us sequestering ourselves away because, you know, we need to build each other up. It's actually about the fact that we are all citizens of this country, and you know, we're going to exercise our right to make change and make a positive difference, you know, however we can. You're right to entertain and to educate, but also, like, you know, we do as much as any other, you know, straight or cisgender person trying to make the world a better place, even for those who might, you know, throw us in a ditch if they so wanted to. But that doesn't change the fact that
we still care.
Yeah, we have a deep connection to every single person in Wollongong. I love Wollongong, this city. I love it.
So do I. Like, even though I'm at a point with drag, it's been so long that I just want to do something different. I'll always be Roxy. I'll always have Roxy there. I just don't want to work as Roxy anymore. So by going to Queensland, I'm so excited for such a big change, but I'm so scared about what community I'm going to have up there, if any. I feel like my support is still all going to be in Wollongong. So if I have any issues up in Queensland, it's going to be like, oh my God, Cherry, guess what?
Yeah,
like,
so
I feel like I was saying to Cherry, I am so nervous about that. But Cherry was saying, you come back in 10 years and everyone's still going to be like, you're Roxy, we love you.
Absolutely.
And like, that was just really nice to hear that, like, you know, my belonging 100% is always going to be here.
Beautiful. Yeah, this really demonstrates the value of performance art and strong sense of community and real impact that it has on so many lives. It's so powerful, makes us feel a difference.
Yeah, for sure.
If any of our listeners are interested in learning more about the queer space, we also encourage you to listen back to episodes on the couch with Chris Cheers and also episode with Curly Saunders.
Especially those episodes are really great in terms of the queer art space. And, you know, really we're talking about drag art. And so Curly Saunders and Chris Cheers talk about other art in the queer space.
Yeah.
Very cool.
This has been such an energising episode of On the Couch. And can I say there's been so many moments hearing stories from you all, and I just got goosebumps over my body of just how, I don't know, alive and beautiful it's hearing from all of you. And
thank you.
Yeah. I would love for you all three to just share a little bit of where you want to see the future of drag and what is it that you would like our listeners to walk away with today.
I just want to see the future of drag still existing. I think we're in a boom at the moment, and it's going to go down. I just want us to still be around, even when we're not in the mainstream anymore. And I want to, if anyone does anything listening to this, support local drag.
Yeah.
Like if you can love your RuPaul's Drag Race, you can love your media on drag, but if you don't go to these venues, straight or not, and support these queer artists, these queer drag performers, we're not going to thrive. We're not going to do it. It's not that we don't want to, we won't be able to. So,
Well, yes, actually, that's so important that like local drag is such a load-bearing column in the drag community. You can watch Drag Race and you can pay $600 for like a meet and greet with Trixie and Kachi or whatever.
Yeah.
But like if you don't like go to fundraisers and actually like pay the door fee to get into these places and be a customer, like the sort of commodity fetishism that has existed and made these drag queens that we see in the mainstream media look so beautiful and polished. It's like, actually, you need mentors, you need open mic nights, you need people who are doing wigs and doing garments and designing things and inventing new ways of doing drag. And so we need to make sure that industry, that local drag industry is kept sustained, because otherwise you're not going to have the drag stars that would have started here and ended up here without that entire ecosystem actually inventing, and designing and allowing them to even get to that space.
and I just add to that as well, because with supporting local artists, I feel like drag queens, drag kings, drag things, drag stars, you have to support your local artists as well. Do you know what I mean? Like if the performers aren't going to support each other, then the foundation itself just is going to crack.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So in the same respect, yes, people listening, go and support it. But if you're a drag performer and you're listening, go and support local drag.
Yes.
And because we talked about this as a community, and that's what it is. And we want to be building each other up and not gatekeeping and paying it forward and sharing information, sharing services and sharing contacts and connections, because why would we hold that back?
Exactly
Yeah.
right.
Nice.
Long live drag.
Mufasa.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on the couch in the studio. It's been a real pleasure, and I'm really looking forward to continuing and following all of your work in this space. And for our listeners, all our resources and links talked about today will be found in our episode show notes, and you'll be sent the follow-up email as well. I know the Caddyshack team and our listeners would love to join us in thanking the three of you for sharing your knowledge, your experience, and your stories with us today. So thank you so much.
Thank
You're
you.
so welcome. Thank you so much for having us on board.
Yeah.